Stephen Johnson was the kind of man people admired from afar. Standing tall with a lean, athletic build and a chiseled jawline, he had a presence that commanded attention. His tailored suits fit him perfectly, resulting from his meticulous eye for detail and the fortune he had at his disposal. He was the heir to the Johnson Group, a global conglomerate operating in industries ranging from technology to real estate, and his wealth was almost mythical. When Stephen attended events, whispers would follow him like shadows. People speculated about his next business move, his romantic life, and the kind of man he was beneath his polished exterior. Few dared to approach him beyond polite small talk, intimidated by the aura of perfection that surrounded him. But none of them knew the truth. Behind the wealth, the power, and the perfectly curated image was a man fighting a hidden battle. At the age of 22, during his final year at Harvard, Stephen experienced his first epileptic seizure. He had been studying for a finance exam late into the night when it struck, a sudden, uncontrollable burst of electrical activity in his brain that left him unconscious. When he woke up in the campus clinic, the attending physician gave him the diagnosis, epilepsy. The news shook Stephen to his core. Until that moment, he had felt invincible, as though the world was his to conquer. But now, he faced a condition he could not control, a vulnerability that could strike without warning. His family was supportive, but their concern only added to his burden. His father, Thomas Johnson, was a titan in the business world, known for his uncompromising standards. While he reassured Stephen that his condition didn't diminish his capabilities, he also warned him about the perception of weakness. "Stephen," his father said during one of their rare heart-to-heart conversations, "the world doesn't understand nuance. They see strength or they see weakness, and they don't bother to look beyond that. You need to decide how much of yourself you want to show them." From that day forward, Stephen became adept at hiding his condition. He learned to recognize the auras that signaled an impending seizure and excused himself when he felt them coming. He carried medication with him at all times and worked closely with a private neurologist who tailored a treatment plan to his lifestyle. But no treatment was perfect, and the fear of a public seizure loomed over him like a shadow. Stephen's life became a balancing act. He built walls around himself, isolating his struggles from the world. His friendships grew superficial, and his romantic relationships rarely lasted beyond a few months. Most women were drawn to the idea of Stephen Johnson, the billionaire bachelor, but few cared to know the man behind the image. As the years went by, Stephen began to feel trapped by his success. Everything he had worked for seemed to lose its meaning. What was the point of building an empire if he couldn't enjoy the simple pleasures of life? He envied the ordinary people he saw on the streets of Lagos, walking hand in hand with their loved ones, laughing with friends at roadside food stalls. On the night of his 32nd birthday, this longing reached its peak. His penthouse was filled with Lagos elite, business magnates, celebrities, and politicians, all gathered to celebrate him. The room buzzed with energy as champagne flowed freely and a live jazz band played in the background. Yet Stephen felt completely alone. He stepped out onto the balcony, leaving the laughter and music behind. The city stretched out before him, a sea of lights and activity. It was a stark contrast to the emptiness he felt inside. As he gazed at the bustling streets below, an idea began to take shape. Stephen wanted to break free from the constraints of his life, to step away from the wealth and the expectations that came with it. He wanted to know what it was like to be seen for who he truly was, not for the billions attached to his name. That night, as the party raged on inside, Stephen made a decision that would change his life forever. He would leave the world of Stephen Johnson behind and step into a new identity, one that would allow him to experience life on his terms. Stephen's resolve didn't waver as he stood on the balcony that fateful night. The thought of stepping away from his life of luxury and prestige felt both terrifying and liberating. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but the longing for authenticity overpowered his fears. He wanted to experience the world without the insulation of wealth, without the protective barrier that money and influence created around him. The first person he confided in was his childhood best friend, Victor Markinson. Victor, a successful lawyer, had always been Stephen's confidant and the one person who treated him as an equal. Over a quiet dinner at Victor's modest home, Stephen laid out his plan. "You want to do what?" Victor asked, his fork frozen mid-air as he processed Stephen's words. "I want to live an ordinary life," Stephen replied, leaning back in his chair. "No private jets, no penthouse, no designer suits. Just me, living like everyone else." Victor raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to pull this off?" You're one of the most recognizable faces in Nigeria. Even if you strip away the money, people will know who you are. Stephen smirked. Not if I blend in. I've thought this through. I'll change my name, move to a new part of the city, and take on a modest job. The goal is to experience life from a perspective I've never known. Victor shook his head, skeptical. You realize this isn't some reality TV show, right? What about your epilepsy? What if you have a seizure and no one knows what to do? That's part of the point, Stephen said earnestly. I want to see how people treat someone vulnerable, who doesn't have the safety net of wealth or power. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who only see what they can gain from me. I need to know if there's more to human connection than that. Victor sighed deeply, but he knew there was no changing Stephen's mind. Fine, he said. But you're not doing this alone. I'll help you set it up. Together, they crafted a plan. Stephen would become John Smith, a mid-level customer service representative at Apex Enterprises, a subsidiary of the Johnson Group. The role was deliberately chosen. It was far enough removed from the executive offices that no one would suspect his true identity, but it would still give him insight into the day-to-day operations of his company. Stephen moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of Lagos, far from the luxurious neighborhoods he was accustomed to. The penthouse, the designer clothes, and the exotic cars were left behind. His new wardrobe consisted of simple shirts and trousers, purchased from local markets. His sleek Aston Martin was replaced by a rickety Volkswagen Beetle that groaned with every turn of the ignition. The first night in his new apartment was jarring. The space was cramped, the furniture sparse, and the hum of traffic from the nearby road was constant. Stephen sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at the bare walls. It was a far cry from the lavish penthouse he had left behind, but for the first time in years, he felt a strange sense of freedom. The next challenge was navigating his condition without the resources he usually relied on. Stephen carried his medication and a medical alert bracelet, but there was no private doctor on call and no personal assistant to keep track of his schedule. He rehearsed how he would explain his epilepsy if the need arose, hoping it wouldn't deter people from seeing him as capable. The first day at his new job was a mixture of nerves and excitement. Stephen arrived at the Apex Enterprises office dressed in a plain white shirt and black trousers, blending in seamlessly with the other employees. The office was a stark contrast to the executive suites he was used to. No polished mahogany desks or panoramic city views, just rows of cubicles, flickering fluorescent lights, and the hum of computers. As he introduced himself to his new colleagues, Stephen noticed a range of reactions. Most greeted him with polite indifference, their attention quickly returning to their tasks. Lucas, a senior team member with a sharp tongue, barely looked up from his desk. The new guy, he said, his tone dismissive. Try not to mess things up. Stephen bit back a retort, reminding himself that this was exactly what he had signed up for. He took his seat at a small desk near the back of the room, determined to prove himself. The work was repetitive and unglamorous, answering customer queries, resolving complaints, and logging issues into the system. But Stephen embraced it with enthusiasm, eager to experience a side of the business he had never known. It wasn't long before his epilepsy came into play. During a routine team meeting, Stephen felt the telltale aura of an impending seizure. He quickly excused himself, retreating to a quiet corner of the office. The seizure was brief, leaving him disoriented but conscious. When he returned to his desk, he noticed the curious glances from his colleagues. Are you okay? Nancy, a quiet but kind team member, asked hesitantly. Stephen hesitated, then decided to be honest. I have epilepsy, he said simply. Sometimes it catches me off guard, but I'm fine now. Nancy nodded, her expression unreadable. Lucas, however, was less tactful. Great, he muttered under his breath. Another liability. Stephen felt a pang of irritation but chose to stay silent. This was exactly why he had embarked on this journey, to understand how people perceived vulnerability and to challenge those perceptions. As the days turned into weeks, Stephen's resolve was tested repeatedly. Lucas's hostility became more blatant, and the stigma of his condition hung over him like a cloud. Yet amidst the challenges, there were small moments of connection that gave him hope, moments that reminded him why he had taken this leap in the first place. The reality of Stephen's new life began to settle in. Days at Apex Enterprises were draining, not because the work was difficult but because of the subtle barriers he faced daily. Lucas's disdain had grown more overt. He frequently undermined Stephen's contributions, rolling his eyes during meetings or scoffing at Stephen's suggestions. Despite the challenges, Stephen refused to let Lucas's attitude define his experience. His resolve to immerse himself in this life only grew stronger. For every obstacle he faced, he found small victories that reminded him of his purpose. One such victory came unexpectedly during a particularly hectic Monday. The team was overwhelmed with complaints following a major service outage. Phone lines buzzed non-stop, and tempers ran high as customers vented their frustrations. "Smith!" Lucas barked from across the room. "You're lagging. Move faster, or we'll never catch up." Stephen clenched his jaw but kept his focus. He calmly handled each call, empathizing with the customers and offering practical solutions. By the end of the day, his cue was clear, and even Nancy, who rarely spoke up, gave him an approving nod. "Not bad," she said quietly as they walked to the elevator together. "Thanks," Stephen replied, surprised by her acknowledgement. Nancy became an unexpected ally in the weeks that followed. She wasn't outspoken, but her kindness showed in small ways: a supportive smile during team meetings, a shared laugh over the office coffee machine, or a whispered heads up when Lucas was in one of his moods. It wasn't just Nancy who began to see Stephen differently. Over time, his colleagues started to recognize his genuine efforts. Despite Lucas's criticisms, Stephen consistently delivered quality work. He stayed late to help struggling teammates, brought a calm presence to tense situations, and never complained about the workload. But the biggest test of Stephen's resolve came during a team-building exercise. Apex Enterprises had organized a company-wide retreat aimed at fostering camaraderie among employees. Stephen hesitated to attend, knowing the physical strain and unpredictability of such events could trigger his epilepsy. Still, he didn't want to appear aloof or uncommitted. The retreat took place at a resort just outside Lagos. The schedule was packed with activities, group discussions, trust exercises, and outdoor challenges. Stephen participated in everything, from building rafts to navigating obstacle courses, determined to push his limits. During one of the exercises, disaster struck. The team was tasked with crossing a makeshift bridge suspended over a shallow stream. Stephen had felt slightly off all morning but dismissed it as fatigue. Halfway across the bridge, he suddenly froze. The warning signs were clear: a flicker of disorientation, a wave of nausea, and then darkness. When he came to, he was lying on the ground, surrounded by concerned faces. Nancy was kneeling beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "Stephen, are you okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he mumbled, trying to sit up. His head throbbed, and his limbs felt heavy, but he managed to force a weak smile. "Just a minor setback." Lucas stood a few feet away, looking visibly unconcerned. Back at the office, Nancy took it upon herself to advocate for Stephen, suggesting simple accommodations that could make the environment safer for him. "It's not about treating him differently," she argued during a team meeting. "It's about ensuring he has the same opportunity to thrive as the rest of us." Her words struck a chord, even with Lucas, who grudgingly admitted, "He does pull his weight around here." The shift in attitude wasn't immediate, but it was significant. For the first time, Stephen felt truly accepted for who he was, not for what he could offer. He realized that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a bridge to genuine human connection. As Stephen continued to navigate his new life, his relationship with Nancy deepened. She was no longer just a kind colleague. She had become a confidant, someone who saw through his facade and recognized his worth. Their late-night conversations over cups of tea became the highlight of his days. Nancy was unlike anyone Stephen had ever known. She didn't care about wealth or status, qualities Stephen had spent his life surrounded by. Instead, she valued authenticity, kindness, and resilience. One evening, as they walked home together, Stephen decided to open up about his true identity. It was a risk, but he trusted Nancy completely. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice tinged with nervousness. Nancy raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Okay, I'm listening."
Stephen took a deep breath and told her everything: the Johnson Group, his decision to step away, and the truth about his experiment. When he finished, Nancy was silent for a long moment. Stephen braced himself for her reaction, but when she finally spoke, her words surprised him. "Well," she said with a small smile, "that explains a lot. I always thought there was something unusual about you. But honestly, it doesn't change how I see you. If anything, I respect you more for taking such a bold step." Stephen felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Nancy's acceptance was the validation he hadn't realized he needed. Their bond grew stronger in the weeks that followed, evolving into something deeper than friendship. Nancy's unwavering support and belief in Stephen gave him the courage to face his challenges head-on. When Stephen finally decided it was time to return to his old life, he knew one thing for certain: he didn't want to leave Nancy behind. The transition back to the Johnson Group was met with mixed reactions. Some of his colleagues were shocked, others impressed by his decision to experience life at the grassroots level. But Stephen's priorities had shifted. He no longer cared about the opinions of those who valued him for his wealth. The only person whose opinion truly mattered was Nancy's. Stephen's return to the Johnson Group marked a pivotal moment, not just for him, but for the organization. His time at Apex Enterprises had reshaped his perspective, grounding him in a way that his previous life never had. With Nancy by his side, Stephen felt a renewed sense of purpose, one that extended beyond boardrooms and profit margins. Nancy had initially been hesitant about stepping into Stephen's world. The lavish lifestyle, the high-profile dinners, and the constant scrutiny of the media felt worlds apart from the simplicity she cherished. But Stephen reassured her at every turn. He was no longer the man who found comfort in excess. He had learned to appreciate the beauty of authenticity and the strength in humility. Their relationship was tested as they navigated these contrasting realities. One particular evening, at an extravagant charity gala hosted by the Johnson Group, Nancy felt like a fish out of water. The room was filled with polished socialites, their laughter tinged with arrogance and their smiles lined with judgment. She stood quietly by Stephen's side, her modest dress and unassuming demeanor drawing curious glances. Stephen noticed her unease and gently squeezed her hand. "You're the most genuine person in this room," he whispered. "Don't let them make you feel otherwise." His words gave her strength. Nancy began engaging in conversations, speaking passionately about workplace inclusion and the challenges faced by employees like Stephen. Her sincerity was disarming, and by the end of the night, she had left a lasting impression on many. Meanwhile, Stephen's leadership within the Johnson Group began to reflect his transformed outlook. He championed initiatives aimed at fostering diversity and inclusivity, drawing from his personal experiences at Apex Enterprises. Under his guidance, the company introduced flexible working arrangements, better health support systems, and mentorship programs for employees from underprivileged backgrounds. But amid all these changes, one thing remained constant: Stephen's devotion to Nancy. Their bond deepened with each passing day, strengthened by mutual respect and shared dreams. Stephen admired Nancy's quiet resilience, while Nancy was inspired by Stephen's determination to redefine what success truly meant. One crisp evening, as they strolled through a serene park near Stephen's estate, he stopped abruptly. The setting sun bathed the landscape in hues of gold and orange, casting a magical glow over the moment. "Nancy," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You've shown me what it means to live a life of purpose, to love without conditions, and to stand strong in the face of adversity. I can't imagine walking this journey without you." From his pocket, he pulled out a simple yet elegant ring, its design a reflection of everything they had shared, unpretentious, timeless, and deeply meaningful. Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "Stephen," she whispered, overcome with emotion. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his gaze steady and filled with hope. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, with a radiant smile, Nancy nodded. "Yes, Stephen. 1,000 times yes." Their wedding was a reflection of their journey, intimate, heartfelt, and devoid of unnecessary grandeur. It took place in a charming garden, surrounded by close friends and family. Stephen's parents, initially skeptical of his choice, were moved by Nancy's sincerity and the undeniable love she and Stephen shared. Even Lucas, who had been invited despite their rocky history, offered a genuine congratulations. As they exchanged vows, Stephen couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. From the boardrooms of the Johnson Group to the bustling call center at Apex Enterprises, every step had led him to this moment. Nancy had not only been his anchor, but also his inspiration to dream of a better, more meaningful life. The celebration that followed was filled with laughter, heartfelt speeches, and a sense of community that Stephen hadn't experienced before. It was a far cry from the elaborate soirees of his past, something simpler, something real. As he and Nancy danced under the stars, Stephen realized he had finally found the life he had been searching for all along. Their journey wasn't without its challenges. Stephen's epilepsy continued to be a part of their lives, but it no longer defined him. Together, they faced each episode with courage and understanding, determined not to let it overshadow the joy they had found in each other. Stephen's transformation became a story of hope within the Johnson Group and beyond. His leadership was celebrated, not just for its impact on the company's bottom line, but for the humanity it brought to the workplace. Lucas had to undergo compulsory training on workplace ethics, inclusivity, and workplace support. And at the heart of it all was Nancy, the woman who had shown him that true wealth lay not in material possessions, but in the strength of relationships and the courage to be authentic. As they stood hand in hand, gazing at the horizon of their new life together, Stephen knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Together, they would continue to navigate the twists and turns of life, guided by love, resilience, and a shared vision for a better tomorrow.